Hey everybody, it's Jess, your peer tutor, here in Module 2. This week we're going to talk about the social sciences, natural sciences, bias, and scholarly sources. I hope everybody had a good week 1, and we're moving on. We're getting into the lenses. So the social science lens is obviously social sciences based. But what are the social sciences? They are a group of academic disciplines that examine society and how people interact and develop as a culture. It's a field of study separate from the natural sciences, which covers biology, chemistry, physics, and all that stuff. Social sciences, can concentrate on the economical, political, scientific, historical, the laws of society. It's interaction. So that's the one thing to remember. It's all about interaction. As an academic field of study, it came out of the Age of Reason, or the Age of Enlightenment, which started in the 18th century in Europe and kind of trickled across the Atlantic into the colonies, the American colonies, and in large part helped fuel what would become the Revolutionary War and then the development of the United States. Thomas Jefferson was a big proponent of the Age of Reason, but these names that you see here are some of the big top guys who were involved in it. Voltaire, Rousseau, Immanuel Kant. I highly recommend you read something about him. He was very interesting. David Hume. I'm sure some of you have heard of these. They are some of the giant intellectuals who laid the groundwork for the study of social sciences in the Western world. We began to look more at our interactions, culturally, politically, economically, and all of that. And then out of that sprung psychology, psychiatry, and things like that. So that's the social sciences. The natural sciences are more, hypothesis based, and we use the scientific method to learn about our world. It's biology, chemistry, astronomy, all that kind of stuff. And it's groundbreaking. The natural sciences are the ones that have the big discoveries in the sciences. From their research, and we're curing cancer, learning more about global warming, and all of the other big stuff that goes on. It's all about learning about our world. But it's a rational approach to the study of the universe and physical world. Astronomy, biology, chemistry, earth science, and physics are the main branches of natural sciences. And then there's some cross disciplines like astrophysics. My husband's an astrophysicist. Biophysics, physical chemistry, geochemistry, biochemistry, etc., etc. So you see that, where the social sciences and natural sciences kind of cross. The social sciences also has a lot of breakdown, and they even kind of come together. And that's awesome, because when you have an astrophysicist, you have the best of, astronomy and physics. So, they can make the groundbreaking discoveries as far as, dark matter, string theory, and all that stuff you hear on the Big Bang Theory, right? Social sciences versus natural sciences. The natural sciences use the scientific method, like I said, in order to study the world around us. And the social sciences is a bit of a misnomer. It refers to the disciplines that study human interactions. Remember how I said the interactions is important? That helps you kind of remember the difference. But they don't qualify as sciences because they don't use the scientific method, because that involves the creation of a hypothesis, the use of that hypothesis to make predictions that can be experimentally tested, and then perform the experiment to see if the prediction is correct. The social sciences is referred to as such due to the involvement of mathematics, specifically statistics, in their studies. And as many of you psych majors will know, statistics is a large part of what you do. So that's the only reason it's labeled a science, is because of that involvement. So now we're going to talk about scholarly articles. That is what you want to use 99.8% of the time in any of your papers, but especially in the humanities, history, and social sciences. Science, you're almost always going to be dealing with what would be considered a scholarly article, unless you're reading something in the last two. But for the sake of college, it's mainly going to be scholarly. But we do run into these other ones in our own life, and I'll start at the right with popular. Popular articles, would be in People, Glamour, Shape, Cosmo, all of that. They're to entertain us or to persuade us to buy things. It's not hidden what they want. They show products. We want them. We go buy them. There's no bibliography, which a bibliography is a list of sources that we used and referred to. Many of you have used that in essays prior. If not, we'll get more into that as the term goes. News or opinion magazines are like U.S. News and World Report, Scientific American, most newspapers. They have their op-eds, and that's what that's about. It provides us general information. Lay people can understand it. Sometimes it has a brief bibliography, but it's mainly by staff writers or freelance writers. There's no real specific education or major or discipline. So, they can write about basically anything. And then we get into our trade magazines like Industry Week, Popular Mechanics, things like that. And they provide news and info on people in a particular industry. Occasionally there's a brief bibliography and or footnotes, which I'm sure some of you have seen footnotes, which we'll get more into as well. And they're usually practitioners or educators within that industry or profession. Occasionally you can use something out of a trade magazine. Always check with your instructor. Sometimes you can find a diamond in the rough. I have on a few occasions, and I've had to use my charisma to persuade my professor at the time. But sometimes there is a diamond in the rough. But like I said, 99.899999% of the time we're going to be using scholarly articles, which we find in the Shapiro Library and other databases. And their purpose is to inform and report on original research or experimentation to the rest of the scholarly world. Has substantial footnotes and or bibliographies. This ain't going to be one or two sources. This is going to be many. And the authors are scholars or researchers in the field, discipline, or specialty. There's going to be a little technical terminology, of course. The reader is always assumed to have a similar scholarly background. Like I said, sometimes there's going to be some jargon you don't understand, but that's what Google's for, right? We can always Google to see, what a word or phrase means. But those are your articles, and like I said, we want to stick with scholarly. And maybe trade. Always check with your instructor, though. Reading scholarly articles. So what we want to do is we want to read the title, because it identifies the main research topic or the topic being discussed in the article. That's important. And then we want to go to the abstract. It provides a brief summary of the article, and that's usually where the thesis is. I know some classes and some assignments ask you to identify the thesis in an article, and that's where you will typically find it. And the conclusion. That doesn't sound right. Why would step 3 be reading the conclusion? We would really typically read it last when we're reading something, but it's good practice to look at it after you review the title and the abstract to see if the article provides you with the information you were seeking. Because the conclusion, is a breakdown of all the main key findings, the takeaways of the study or article. It points out to any limitations of the study as well, and it identifies where further research may be needed, and that will become important. And also the literature reviews, they explain why the research was needed and also identifies gaps. And then we will go to materials and methods. That section explains step by step how the experiment or research was conducted. This is especially important in the natural sciences. It allows for other scholars to duplicate the research. Citations. And this could also be the bibliography or the footnotes. This section lists all the sources that were referenced or referred to in the study. Sorry. It is important to check to see if the sources used are current. And that's important for, I would say, the natural sciences and social sciences. History and humanities, you can get away with using a little older sources. It just depends on the context of the topic that you're looking at. And then the results and discussion. Once again, this is more for the natural sciences because it states the results of the research. Social sciences a lot of times will have this as well, but it points out limitations of the study and identifies further research again. So that's the order in which we want to read a scholarly article, which is really important for your short response this week. We're going to use the reading strategies we just discussed for reading this article on air pollution through the lens of natural science. So we're going to read that article, and we're going to think about the steps we just talked about, which there is a PDF of the same steps I just discussed for your reference, and then we're going to talk about what steps that are the easiest to you. What one did you personally find to be the easiest? And everybody, there is no right or wrong answers to these questions, so be honest. Don't say what you think the instructor wants to hear. Be honest. This is all about learning and, growing as a student. So, don't think that you need to, try to impress your instructor at all, because they're here to help you. And then discuss what you are finding most difficult about reading and understanding the article. Point out any key, phrases, even the topic itself, if you're having a hard time grasping them because you don't know much about it or whatever it may be. And then you're going to talk about, were there any parts of the article that you did not understand? If so, identify them. And this is where you can kind of take citations, which we'll talk about here shortly. Because you always want to give credit to anything that you direct quote, summarize, or paraphrase in APA. So I will actually link the APA LibGuide in the Shapiro Library to this video at some point. So hopefully that will be on here. If not, it's easy to find in the Shapiro Library, and I'm sure your instructors will share it with you as well. And then the last one, in your own words, what do you think the main idea of the article is? So this isn't, you don't have to cite, you don't have to do any of that. This is in your own words. What do you think the main idea of the article was? So, once again, each of these is going to be 2 to 3 sentences. We don't want to go much more than that. A short paragraph is perfect. I'd say don't go over 4 sentences for sure. Keep it brief. Remember, we want to start trying to get our ideas out in as little room as possible. So that is your short response for this week. And now we're going to talk about bias, which is equally as important. So we all know what bias is. We think it's bad. It's all the isms. Partially, but it's also, we can have good biases too. I love ancient Egypt, so I'm very biased to ancient Egypt. See, that's not necessarily a bad thing. So we're all biased for our children. So things like that. So it doesn't have to be a bad thing. It has a negative connotation, of course. But when we're dealing with it in sources, there are a few things that we can do to recognize it, because it's important to recognize any biases in a source, because that helps with credibility and usability. Did I just make up a word? usability. I don't know if that's a word, but I like it. And this involves the CRAP test for evaluating sources. Yes, this is a lot of crap, isn't it? Andrew and I love the CRAP test. Alright, so it's 5 steps that when you utilize these, it will help you see if there are any biases in your source and what they are. So the first one is C, and this is the timeliness of the information, or when it was published or posted. Has it been revised or updated? Is it too current or too out of date for your topic? Are the links functional? That's important. But is the information current or out of date, too current or out of date for your topic? And this is important, especially when it comes to the natural sciences. You want as up to date as possible. You want within the last 3 months if possible. When it comes to history, a lot of people think the older the better. Not necessarily. Things written the day after the Pearl Harbor attacks were emotion filled and not really detailed and really credible at that point. Now, something written 10 years later when we had more information would be better to use because we did have more details. And relevance, of course, is, does the information relate to your topic and answer your questions? Any questions that you have going into it or what you want to answer. Who's the intended audience? Is it, this comes a member of scholarly sources and all of that. Is this more like People magazine where it's for anybody, or is it more geared towards professionals and students? Is it at the appropriate level? Not too elementary or too advanced. And also, you want to look at a variety of sources before determining, settling on one. So you have to take that into account as well. Do you think that this source is the best one to kind of highlight your topic? Because, that's basically what we're doing when we're taking out the information to cite out of an article. It's to highlight, the information and to back up our argument or thesis. So we want to make sure that we're picking the right kind of sources. And the first A is authority, and that's the source, and that's who is the author, or the publisher, or the sponsor, etc. And are there credentials or organizational affiliations given? That's important because we want to know who they are. Is this Joe Schmo in his mom's basement, or, a doctor of political science from Harvard? That's really important. We need to know who they are and if they actually have the credentials to write about what they're writing about. Because any of us can write about anything, right? But no one's going to believe us unless we have a background in what we're writing about. And the second A is accuracy, and that's the reliability, truthfulness, and correctness of the content. So where does the information come from? Is it supported by evidence? Are they using their primary sources and secondary sources? Has it been peer reviewed? That's important. Can you go verify the information? Can you go check their sources? Does the language or tone seem too biased and free of emotion? Or does it seem like they're putting a lot of themselves into the article? And the P, which is the final one, is the reason the information exists. What is the purpose? Are they informing, teaching, selling, entertaining, persuading? Most scholarly articles are to inform and teach. And do the authors or the sponsors, publishers, etc., are they making their intentions or purpose clear? Is it the information fact, opinion, propaganda? Remember, we want fact. So does the point of view appear objective and impartial? That's what we're looking for, free of bias. So that's the CRAP test. Use it, love it, learn it. It's amazing, and you'll notice that you'll be using it and you won't even realize it. So it's a beautiful tool to have when dealing with scholarly articles. And that is all for this week. I will see you next week in Module 3.